to talk about Sir Laurence Wackett, and then we'll talk about Laurence Hartnett. There's quite a parallel in those two lives. Each of those two gentlemen had the same name, although it was spelt differently. One was L-A-U and the other was L-A-W. But back to Sir Laurence Wackett. He had a great influence for good on the Commonwealth Aircraft Company. He lost his father when he was only 5 years young. He went to Duntroon. He was in the third intake for Duntroon Military College. But Duntroon was all about horses. Laurence Wackett mentioned aircraft and was almost summoned for heresy. In the World War II, however, he joined the Australian Flying Corps, and he developed as you might remember from my address, we saw photographs of his rotating machine gun turret. Earlier, in World War I, the aircraft had to be flown and then oriented to the direction of fire, whereas with the rotating turret, he could shoot in most of all directions. And then Sir Laurence Wackett developed an aircraft company of his own, and then when Commonwealth Aircraft was founded, he became manager and chief designer for C.A.C. So Laurence Wackett was a very significant contributor. But for today, I'm going to revert to Sir Laurence Hartnett. His life, you will find, has some similarities to Wackett. In the formation stages of Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation, a committee was set up. It consisted of BHP with Essington Lewis, BHP Smelters with Sir Colin Fraser, and General Motors Holdens with L.J. Hartnett. So my question is, what part did Hartnett play in the formation of that committee? And I'm drawing my material from Hartnett's book, Big Wheels and Little Wheels. There he is in later life. He was born, Hartnett was born in 1898, and his father died in 1899. So, like Wackett, he lost his father at a very early age. His father was an eminent doctor, the first to advocate sunshine and fresh air and rest and diet as a cure for TB. But he left little money to the family, although several patents for surgical equipment brought in a small income. Hartnett and his mother lived with his Uncle Michael at Kingston on Thames. His Uncle Michael became a father to Hartnett. On their many walks together, they visited the local railway station. Hartnett was able to mount the footplate and developed an interest in things mechanical. He was not only interested in how they worked, but how they were made. Uncle Michael wanted Hartnett to become a doctor, as was his father. He was sent to Epsom College, traditional school for doctors, which was very strict. He studied classics, Latin and Greek, played sport as a rugby scrum half. He said later that tough schooling taught him how to work and to play. But his passion for things mechanical overcame any interest in medicine. He was interested, we might note, in aviation. He built a glider which flew for 500 yards. Hartnett had a passion for motorcycle engines. A friend's father had a Douglas, which they serviced and rode. His mother recognised this passion and decided to support him. Who did they know in engineering? Who could help young Laurence? Well, a relative knew Sir Trevor Dawson, who was head of Vickers. Hartnett was signed on as one of 12 management apprentices. He worked in machine shops, a forge, a foundry, and the drawing office, plus technical school in the evenings. He started at Vickers in 1914. He worked in the stores and then the tool room. He understood micrometers, manufacturing jigs and fixtures. He machined to 1/2,000th of an inch, which is quite an art. He learnt to scrutinise a blueprint. He operated lathes, milling machines, shapers, grinders and boring machines. He appreciated and admired human factory workers. They were rough and ready, yes, but they were loyal and honest and diligent. He understood working from project conception to mass production. He worked on Vickers' secret projects. And one was Otter, which was a mine-sweeping paravane. He worked in the aero engine test house, shades of a parallel with Wackett. He decided to enlist. He applied for both the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Squadron. RNAS accepted him. It was the forerunner of the fleet era. Here he is as a young lad in the particular uniform. The uniform allowance for the Royal Flying Corps was £50. For the Royal Navy, it was £10. His family's limited funds caused him to write to the Admiralty to complain. He was called before a senior officer who admonished him, but he learnt that it was not his letter that they were upset about, but one his mother had written to the king. His first flying instructor was an Australian, Muller Chateau. He went under dual instruction in a Morris Farman. Morris Farman, we're told, was not a stable aircraft. The aircraft seemed more surprised than the pilot that both were in the air. After 8 hours duel, Hartnett went solo. 3 touch and goes went well, but the 4th, on landing, too fast, no brakes, it hit a tree, plane was a write-off. There's the aircraft at the beginning of the flight and the end. The instructor said that Hartnett should go up again immediately. They flew dual, but the instructor was piloting in another Morris Farman. Landed too heavily, it crumpled and rolled on its side. Very interesting history. He gained an international pilot's license from the Royal Aero Club. He flew in a DH-9, chasing a Zeppelin over London. He flew Camels and Sopwith pups. He was posted to night flying with Hadley Page bombers and DH-6s, and then to FE-2Bs. He crashed one of those at a forced landing at night, running out of fuel. And there was the FE-2B. It was a pusher aircraft, propeller, with a gunner in the forecockpit. The armistice came at 1918, and he was discharged in May 1919. On his first Sunday at home, he found an advertisement for motor and engineering business at Wallington, near Croydon, with a loan from Barclays Bank and help from his mother, he bought it. It was a historic period for motor car manufacture. By age 21, he was making more than £1,000 a year, which was quite a sizable income then. And then came the financial slump. He had to shut down. There's the photograph of his business, and there he is standing with a motorcycle and sidecar. He was shown a newspaper advertisement, engineer for Far East position, in 1923. The firm was Guthrie and Company, which had been in Singapore and Malaya for 150 years. He went to London head office, tipped the lift operator 5 bob for the name of the head of the company, gained an interview, voiced his family connections, and got the job. A week later, he was on the liner Malwa, Singapore bound. He was met on arrival in Singapore by a man from Guthrie's. He was taken later for the usual Guthrie clothing order. 20 white suits and 5 monkey jackets. From the start, Hartnett had an interest in Guthrie's fortunes with cars. They had a franchise for Daimler. Hartnett felt that General Motors held better promise, and he arranged a distributorship for Buick. Hartnett became Guthrie manager at 25. He spoke Malay, treated Malay and Tamil employees with respect. There's a photograph of him at the time, in his mid-20s. He imported equipment and began the first radio station in Singapore and Malaya. In 1925, he was married in Singapore to his London girl next door, Gladys. In 1926, General Motors head office were impressed with his sales, employed him and sent him to India. He toured India by car, identified distributors, sales went up, he was invited to America. He worked there with General Motors Export Company. Here's an early photograph. Hartnett is the extreme left in the photograph, and third from the left was Alfred P. Sloan, GM of General Motors. He set up a new GM plant in Sweden, age 29. He constructed buildings from the ground up. He had 15,000 cars and assembled and sold in 12 months. Finland added to his assembly and sales role. He impressed Sloan, the chairman of General Motors. In 1929, he moved to London with Vauxhall Motors and developed the Bedford truck. His age, 33. Here he is, again with Alfred P. Sloan. In 1933, age 35, there was a merger of General Motors Australia, Proprietary Limited, with Holden Motor Body Builders Limited to form General Motors Holden. Hartnett was appointed Managing Director of General Motors Holden. There was a high Australian tariff on bodies made overseas, and General Motors Holden was losing money. He balanced the importation of Dodge chassis with the Holden manufactured body parts. They were assembled in Brisbane and Sydney and Melbourne and Adelaide and here in Perth. It was an amazingly complex assembly line, especially for new models where the designs originated overseas. presses and dies for new body parts involved much time and cost. Hartnett revamped the management structure. He had great respect for the Australian can-do attitude. In 1935, Consolidated General Motors Holden distributed properties by building a central property at Fisherman's Bend in Melbourne, literally from the ground up. And there's the finished product at that time. The plant was opened by Prime Minister Lyons in 1936. Earlier, in 1934, there was the McRobertson's London to Melbourne air race, which led to the birth of an idea of aircraft industry in Australia. In the race, there was a twin-engined Douglas DC-2. As an ex-flyer in World War I, Hartnett knew of the AOC RAAF, Dick Williams. They both inspected the Douglas, and Williams said, "I believe General Motors have a big interest in Douglas." But General Motors headquarters definitely said no. Archdale Parkhill, who was the Minister of Defence at the time, he was anxious to manufacture planes for defence in Australia. And he asked Hartnett how to proceed. Hartnett suggested writing personal letters to top men in the 6 biggest firms in Australia. He received a copy of his own letter. The meeting of BHP, the smelters, ICI and Hartnett a few days later formed a syndicate with £40,000. It was proposed that Hartnett lead a study mission to America and to Britain and Europe. Hartnett declined due to tasks he had at General Motors Holdens. And then came the meeting. Dick Williams proposed Laurence Hartnett, who was then running 2 aircraft in Sydney. Hartnett met Hartnett a few days later. The syndicate, of which Hartnett was a member, bought Tugan, the company, Hartnett and his planes for £15,000. Alfred P. Sloan of General Motors continued to be unhappy, but he was placated when Hartnett told him of his being a pilot and understanding the engineering requirements of manufacturing aircraft. The syndicate adopted Hartnett's commission recommendation that North American NA-16 aircraft and Pratt & Whitney engines be the first for Commonwealth Aircraft to manufacture. C.A.C. was formed with a nominal capital of £1 billion, and the plant was built at Fisherman's Bend. Hartnett was busy building the C.A.C. plant while Hartnett was in the US securing licenses. Hartnett recognised the need for research facilities and convinced Prime Minister Lyons to establish ARL, the Australian Research Laboratories, at Fisherman's Bend, separate plant. And during World War II, Australian aircraft industry provided a godsend. Every bomber and fighter, complete to the last nut and bolt, was a made in Australia product. Post-war, manufacture was dwindling. Overseas purchasing predominated. Some years later, Hartnett pulled out of C.A.C, sold a 10% interest to Rolls-Royce. During World War II, Hartnett was Director of Ordnance Production under Essington Lewis, the Director General of Munitions. He got no ready help from Britain. He had to work from scratch. The ordnance production developed. Owen guns, 25-pounders. We all know the 25-pounder. There's one in South Perth, in Angelo Street, on display. Optical glass for instrument making. And Mission X. Hartnett proposed Mission X because he felt, with the then Japanese invasion that Singapore was about to fall. And he chartered a merchant ship to proceed to Singapore and select and assemble steel, precision machine tools to bring back to Australia. But sadly, the Japanese invasion was much more rapid than his development, and that one failed. The Inventions Directorate had the Seeking Torpedo, a landmine director, and a detector, and a recoilless gun. He flew to America for Lend-Lease. After World War II, Ben Chifley, Prime Minister Chifley, expressed the need for an Australian car. General Motors, in general, were reluctant. Hartnett designed detail and design and sales pitch in Detroit. General Motors in America approved General Motors Holden designing and building a car, but General Motors Holden had to find the finance. You want to build it, you fund it. The design, as we know, was based on a 6-cylinder Chev prototype. Chifley assisted in the financing from the Commonwealth Bank, $2.5 million, plus Bank of Adelaide, $500,000. The styling and the bodywork was by Australians. The mechanical was done in Detroit, but by combined Australians and Americans. And there's the one we know. Hands up anybody who didn't own one of those. You didn't own one of those, no? Very, very un-Australian. And when the Holden was being designed, Hartnett greatly simplified his manufacture and its assembly. By 1964, 1 million Holdens had been made and sold in Australia and overseas. In 1947, Hartnett declined an executive post in America, and he resigned as general manager of GMH just before the first Holden rolled off the assembly line in 1948. General Motors Holden was now fully American owned, and there were arguments with General Motors. Hartnett resigned. Hartnett was replaced as the managing director of General Motors Holdens by Harold Bettel. Hartnett went to America. He was offered a job of Australian franchise for Willys Overland, and he declined. Ben Chifley consoled him and congratulated Hartnett and encouraged him to continue planning to make cars. Hartnett visited British and European car manufacturers. He considered Renault, Fiat, Volkswagen. The prototype by Gregoire was taken by Hartnett to Australia, shown to Ben Chifley, who rode in it. The prototype Hartnett car was effectively hand-built, and there's the Hartnett production line. There's the Hartnett car, a different panel van type. This was one design from Gregoire, a 4-cylinder horizontally-apposed engine and an aluminium body. A very forward-looking design. But this was the Hartnett that was built. It was a front-wheel drive, it was air-cooled, 600cc, and a horizontally-opposed twin. And there he is with Prime Minister T.J. Menzies. Hartnett was asked to submit a proposal to manufacture his car in Australia. In 1949, Victoria offered a site and assistance at Frankston and then reneged. The Menzies Liberal government was not willing to support a project put in place by Chifley's Labor government. The Hartnett Motor Company was wound up. Hartnett sold Nissan cars. So in summary, this is Laurence John Hartnett. He was appointed in 1945 Commander of the Order of the British Empire. In 1967 he was knighted in the Queen's birthday honours. He's still remembered in Australia as the father of the Holden. He had become an Australian. He retired to his house in Mount Eliza. He died in 1986. Thank you.